Hellblade 2 is one of those games that only comes out once in a generation. The visuals are leaps and bounds beyond any game in the world right now. Yes, including Horizon Forbidden West. And its depiction of psychosis and mental disorders is absolutely mind-blowing. Seriously, playing Hellblade 2 is like experiencing a fever dream with a non-stop barrage of voices booming in your ears.
Would you give your life for these outsiders?
And graphics so breathtakingly beautiful, you just want to ask the game out on a date and marry it. Some, however, have criticized the game as being all flash and no substance. Some have called it a working simulator with lots of dazzling visuals, but not much to do gameplay-wise. This is especially due to the game's brief 7-hour campaign and lack of side content. It's also the reason why the game has gotten somewhat average reviews from some outlets, with an 8 out of 10 from IGN and a 6 out of 10 from GameSpot. Is Hellblade 2 really a masterpiece or an overhyped walking simulator? Find out in today's review. Alright, kicking things off with development. Hellblade 2 is developed by Ninja Theory, the studio behind Heavenly Sword, Bleeding Edge, the much maligned DMC reboot, and of course Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Despite the relative success of their earlier games, it was the success of the first Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice that really put Ninja Theory on the map, causing Microsoft to swoop in and acquire the outfit as a subsidiary of Xbox Studios. Considering how successful Hellblade was in 2017, most people assumed development on the sequel began right away. However, in actuality, development began in 2020, a short while after the announcement trailer at the 2019 Game Awards. Hellblade 2: Senua's Saga is Ninja Theory's most ambitious project yet. While the first game was developed by a team of 20 programmers on steroids, the second game had as many as 100 people working on it, which is a huge step up, but still meager compared to the size of other AAA game studios. The concept for Hellblade 2 was mainly formed by the studio's co-founder and creative director, Timim Antoniades. Antoniades took inspiration from Iceland's jaw-dropping beauty and magnificence to create the game's setting and story. Ninja Theory chairman Dom Matthews confirmed this, calling the game a love letter to Iceland. Ninja Theory's team pulled out all the stops in preparation for the game, including consulting a Cambridge professor and people suffering from mental disorders to accurately depict psychosis and using a satellite imagery to reconstruct the Icelandic landscape accurately. This is a part of the reason why the setting looks so photorealistic. Actress Melina Jurgens reprised her role as Senua, providing both motion capture footage and voice of the protagonist. To further embody Senua's character, Jurgens traveled to Iceland to experience the area's harsh climate firsthand. She studied martial arts and fencing techniques to develop a unique fighting style and recorded scenes while in full costume and makeup, a process that took almost 8 hours to apply fully. Talk about extreme method acting. That lady straight up became an actual Viking to play the role of Senua. But it pays off in the end because the level of emotion Senua displays in the game is enough to give The Last of Us 2 a run for its money. Finally, the game was released on the 21st of May for the Xbox Series X and S and Windows, but you probably already knew that. So in that case, let's talk about the story. Knowing about the events of the first game really comes in handy for understanding Hellblade's story and complex narrative. In the first game, Senua, an 8th century warrior suffering from psychosis, journeys to Helheim, which is like the underworld of Norse mythology. Her goal is to save the soul of her deceased lover, Dillion, from the goddess Hela. However, through her flashbacks, we learn that much of what she experienced in her journey were hallucinations due to her psychosis and grief over the death of Dillion at the hands of Norsemen and Viking slavers. Senua finally comes to terms with her loss and accepts the voices in her head, which she calls the Furies, and invites the player to follow her on more adventures. Senua's Saga takes place a little while after the events of the first game. Senua willingly allows herself to be captured by Viking slavers in hopes of freeing other slaves on a mysterious Icelandic island. Her plan was to follow Thorster, the master of slavers, to their settlement of Borgarviki, and while there, save the other slaves. By the way, I'm pretty sure I'm murdering most of these Norse names, so please do not quote me. Anyway, their ship capsized and many died in the process, which Senua blamed herself for. While traversing the shores of the island, Senua still hears the voices of the Furies taunting, deriding, and yet encouraging her. She is also followed by the Shadow, an entity created from the memory of her abusive father. Senua later finds and defeats the slave master Thorster, taking him prisoner so he can lead her to the settlement of Borgoviki. After freeing a captive named Fargrimer from a Draugr camp, Senua learns that the island is besieged by giants from Jotunheimer. With the aid of godlike creatures called the Hidden Folk, Senua defeats the first giant, Iltuawa. She and her companions then embark on a journey to rescue the slaves being sacrificed by Thorster's father, a man known as the Godi, and defeat the rest of the giants. I know, that's a lot to take in, and yet there's still so much more, which I'm not going to say here so I don't spoil it all for you. Needless to say, Hellblade's story is just as riveting as its stellar graphics. It becomes even more mind-boggling when you realize that much of what she sees, hears, and experiences on her adventures are actually hallucinations. It's up to you to figure out what's real and what Senua conjured up from her fragmented mind. Piecing that puzzle together while being harassed by the voices howling at you from left to right is an underrated experience that I didn't know I needed. I will talk more about the sound design later, but trust me, it's absolutely phenomenal. The game is gory, hyper-realistic, and bursting with themes of loss, death, and redemption. If you're a lover of story-heavy, character-driven, single-player games with lots of blood and guts like The Last of Us, then Senua's Saga may be just what you're looking for. Alright, let's talk about the gameplay and combat. Senua's Saga gameplay is the aspect of the game that might turn off a couple of gamers. The gameplay involves taking on a series of story objectives while meeting new characters and solving puzzles along the way. You also get to take part in some very cinematic fight encounters from time to time. More on that later. Here's the thing that really rubs some players the wrong way. Hellblade 2 is a very cinematic game and it plays out pretty much like a movie. There are no tutorials, no side quests, quest markers, mini maps, loot boxes, legendary weapons, health bar, stamina bar, or even a new game plus. No items or costumes to pick up or customize. It's just a straightforward story. In other words, Senua's Saga is a game that's trying really hard not to look like a game. That wasn't a deal breaker for me, but I get that it can be really jarring for some others. In fact, I think it's really refreshing to play a game that's full of heart and emotion, especially in this age when the industry is chock full of life service, online only, soulless games like the Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League. Another area you might have a problem with is the length of the game. There's no question about it. Senua's Saga is a brief game. You can beat it in 6 hours or 4 if you live in your mother's basement. And I get why people might get pissed about that. However, as a married guy with kids and a day job, I actually appreciate having to play a game that's straight to the point and delivers a conclusive, satisfactory end. It was nice not getting buried in an avalanche of fetch quests, side quests, and escort missions where the NPCs crawl at a glacial pace to pad up the runtime. More importantly, I appreciated the developers' effort to one-up themselves with the sequel. The puzzles are less cumbersome, there are more characters to talk to now, and the combat is much more frequent and fluid. Speaking of the combat, Hellblade 2 has a faster and more aggressive approach to combat compared to the first game. Yes, it's still choreographed, but being able to pull a perfect parry and watching the unique death animations that followed each kill left me feeling like a badass every single time. I also enjoyed the fact that Senua was an emotional and human character. I found myself empathizing with her and caring about what would happen to her in the end. Now, juxtapose that with one-dimensional characters like Aloy from the Horizon series, and you will begin to appreciate Hellblade 2 a lot more. Ultimately, Hellblade 2's gameplay may not do it for everyone, but I enjoyed it. And if you go in with an open mind, I think you might too. All right, now about the visuals and sound design. What can I say about Hellblade's visual that I haven't said already? It's simply breathtaking. So much so that at times I found myself wondering whether I was still playing a video game or watching a movie. Everything looked so picturesque, from the rocky landscape to the billowing sea crashing against the craggy shore. It really says something when the actual gameplay looks just as visually impressive as the cutscenes. The crazy part is that none of it is pre-rendered, which explains why every scene seamlessly merges into the next. Also, don't get me started on the facial expressions. Every twitch, twinge, and micro expression is boldly written in Senua's face. It makes the game incredibly immersive, especially when I get to those visceral scenes filled with enough body horror to put the fear of God in you. And finally, the sound design in Hellblade 2 is probably one of the best I've experienced in any game. The game uses a 3D binaural audio setup, which allows sound to filter in from one ear to the next. This leads to an extremely unnerving experience, especially since you constantly have the Furies whispering words and barking orders from ear to ear through much of the game. At one point, I almost leaped from my seat when I heard a guttural scream within my room, only to realize it was actually coming from the game. Seriously, just do yourself a favor, get some quality headphones, turn the volume all the way up, and enjoy the ride.
Game on.
Okay, about the commercial performance. Having only launched a couple of weeks ago, it's still pretty early to determine exactly how well Hellblade 2 will do financially. This is especially true since Microsoft and Ninja Theory have yet to officially announce Hellblade 2's launch sales or how many players tried it on Game Pass. However, judging from the fact that it peaked at only 3,982 concurrent players at launch, we can only speculate that its commercial performance so far is modest at best. This rings true especially when you consider that Redfall, the other Xbox exclusive from last year, peaked at about 6,000 players at launch, and we all know how well the game turned out. Considering the troubling climate at Microsoft right now with the closure of Tango Gameworks and other studios, you might feel Ninja Theory may be under a bit of pressure. Still, if rumors are to be believed, their next game has already been greenlit by Microsoft. If so, then I don't expect the studio to close anytime soon. Ultimately, it's pretty hard to tell how successful the game will be in this Game Pass era of video games, but let's just hope it does well enough to convince Microsoft to make more sequels going forward. Fingers crossed. About the spirit of this game, Hellblade is more than just a game, it's a work of art. Ninja Theory didn't just want to make a dime a dozen hack and slash game, which would be simply forgotten in a minute later. Rather, they wanted a game that would crawl under your skin and stick with you for a long time to come. We can see this through their attention to detail, research on psychosis, and incredible acting performances by all of its cast members. Intense cinematic games that put the story ahead of cheap thrills aren't always beloved by the general public, as we saw with The Last of Us 2 and the supermassive games, but they push the boundaries of what we think games should be and create unforgettable experiences. It may have its flaws, but I think Hellblade 2 is an incredible game, and I hope to see more bold and unique games like it over time. Lastly, the verdict. Hellblade 2 may not be, for most people, the funnest game in the world, neither the longest, but what it lacks in gameplay and replayability, it makes up far more with exquisite story, mind-bending visuals, nail-biting combat, hypnotic sound design, and incredible character performances. It's not perfect, but I think it's a genuinely unique gaming experience that everyone should try. With that in mind, I'll give this game a review score of 4 out of 5. So do you agree or disagree with my review? Let me know what you think in the comments. Remember to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell to get regular updates on new videos. I really had fun playing this game, you guys, and I hope you enjoyed this review. We'll catch you in the next video.